All right, guys, welcome back to another episode on Solario Lofts. This is our episode, I think episode 3. Today we have Mr. Joe Collins. He's one of the guys in the homework club that we're in, this local club. He's really knowledgeable, so I figured he'd be one of the first homework guys to bring on here. So, kind of start out, Joe, about how you kind of got into pigeons. I don't know if you started with homers or if you had any other breeds, but kind of how did you start kind of in the pigeons and who introduced you into them?
I read a book, Homing Pigeons by Herbert S. Sim,
Okay.
when I was about 9 years old.
Okay.
And for some reason, I just wanted them.
Really?
Yep. And then, matter of fact, back then I had a couple older gentlemen that brought me a couple boxes of birds.
Okay.
And I've had them every day since.
Okay. And so when you started in the hobby, you kind of started with homers. You didn't have
I
anything
had
else?
mixed. I had fantails and
Okay.
Venus and homers,
Okay.
but I wasn't competing or anything.
Okay. Makes sense. When did you kind of start like competing? I don't know. Was the AU back then?
Yeah.
Was
we
that around,
were
or-
IF then, but AU
IF?
was still there. Yes.
Okay. So you started competing with that right away?
We started competing in a club in the 90s.
Okay. So how did you get certain birds from guys in the club, or how did you go out getting birds and finding what bloodline you really liked?
I had a good friend, a mentor, that he had a really good bloodline of birds. He had some of the old Grooters.
Okay, Grooters.
And he kind of took me under his wing, and we pretty well stayed together till a couple years ago till he passed.
Okay. Makes sense. What so you said Grooters were kind of what you started with. Over the years, did you kind of just did you breed birds first, or did you get youngsters from him, and that how you kind of started?
Youngsters and breeders.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as far as you know, there were Grooters, so there were maybe some other stuff.
Yeah, he had some of the old Heitzman Stasser.
Okay.
And Heitzman Sion and
okay. So with that, how did you do like when you started competing? Did you do all right? Is there anything that you wish someone would have told you when you had started that helped you out a little?
Oh yeah,
along the way?
I mean, every race, every season's a learning experience.
Right.
Still to this day.
Right. Exactly. So how long did you keep that family? Or I guess that in homers it's strain, right? They call it strain. How long did you keep that, and do you still have any of that stuff still down the line, or did you kind of just
Yes,
I've still
got some of that from down the line. My art club disbanded, and then it was probably 6 years, and before I got into the Metro Club.
Okay.
And so I kind of the breeders got old.
Right.
And actually, my loft was more like a nursing home at the time.
Yeah, it's when it gets to that point, you're like, man, you got to start doing something, right? So what family do you have now, and how do you kind of like what do you look for when you're getting into a new family?
I like the birds that's flown races, and everything in the pedigree is not 3 generations old, just copied.
Right.
You know, birds that perform.
Okay.
Right now I'm flying some Gainus, Mona Lisa, and Wolverine.
Okay.
And then I've got some birds, a good family of birds that come from Dr. Michael Brown in California, Sky Lake Sions.
So you're kind of working with that stuff right now.
Then I've still got my old mine Trentons.
Okay, yeah. That's kind of how Joe and I got kind of started as far as that goes. Kind of hit it off from the beginning. Is I told him, I said I really love the Trentons, and that's kind of, he was like, well, I have Trentons, and that's kind of how we kind of hit it off and got real familiar and that kind of thing. So how long have you been competing as far as like locally and that kind of thing? I know you said when you were younger.
Since 91.
91, okay. 91.
We had a little small break there when the club
Okay.
Disbanded when the gas prices really hit high.
All right. Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to flying, what's your criteria for when you go to put birds in races and stuff like that? Or is it kind of just what makes it home is what you send, or how do you go about your criteria around that kind
That's
of stuff?
that's what I try to do.
Really?
If I train it, I send it.
Okay.
So unless there's something wrong with it, as far as maybe I had a couple young birds that the hawk hit and didn't
Right.
have a tail at all, so
Right.
they missed the young bird season. But I try not to medicate.
Hmm.
My medical program's really small, and so if a bird gets sickly or a family, and sometimes you see that with certain families,
Right.
yeah, some birds just don't have the immune system that the other birds do. So
Right. Exactly. Um. So when it comes to medication, you said you don't really do much. I mean, what do you do? Obviously you probably worm them, and what kind of stuff do you do as far as that
I
stuff?
individually worm each bird
Hmm.
twice a year.
Hmm.
I do a 4-1 for 3 days before for the old bird training.
Hmm.
I do a 4-1 for 3 days before the young bird training,
Okay.
and then other than that, just feed them good and grit. And I do use the e-tonic from Seagulls,
Okay.
and that has really been a good thing there.
Okay. So like when a bird gets sick, you kind of just kind of watch it. Obviously, you take it out. You There's not really much else you really do as far as like
No,
medication or anything like. Because
no,
if it's weak, it's
yeah,
with a
no,
homer. There's really no coming back if it
no.
gets too weak at a certain
I don't.
point.
I don't mess with them on that.
Right. You just kind of let it take its course if that's what it's going to do. Um. Okay. Yeah, and then you had said something about the feed. So, what kind of feed do you feed? And you probably feed a different mix. We're during race season, but when you're not racing, what do you normally feed? Just something basic, or
Very basic corn and laying pellets.
okay? So it's just
Yep,
this is
that's my maintenance feed during the breed, and that's mainly what the breeders get.
okay.
Um, a lot of people say that the pellets cause loose droppings, but I haven't had that issue too much.
Okay. Do you do like 16%, 22%, or
16%.
16%?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's obviously what you feed your breeders as well, like
Yep.
you said.
And I do add some time to time add Milo or wheat.
Right.
Nothing real. No good mix or anything like that.
Right. And so like when you're obviously before race season, you're going to be like road training. Do you feed them what you feed them during race season, or do you have another mix that you
No,
feed
no.
them?
Once I start training, I go with started using the Versalaga IC Champion,
Okay.
and then for the distance races, I had little corn,
Okay.
and then on the day home from the races, I usually feed like a depurative,
Okay.
which is smaller seeds, more wheat and barley, just something light.
Excuse me. Okay. So when it comes to just like you said, when you're flying or just law flying or anything like that, you're feeding them that. Um, and so whenever they get weaned, that's pretty much what they're going to be on if they're going to be a flyer for long term is that
Mhm.
the race feed. You
Yep.
don't change it up at all. Obviously,
No,
you're not going to tell us all your secrets, but
no, I don't. I go to a more maintenance,
okay.
like the Versalaga traditional or something like that through the
Hmm.
off season.
Okay.
But I don't. Like I said, my breeders, my mentor,
Hmm.
he lived in the hills. He didn't have access to at that time like KT feed or Brown's feed or any of the high dollar mixes, and for one, he
Right.
couldn't afford it.
Right.
Uh, he was an expert on animal pellets.
Really.
Uh, on his when he was breeding, he used a 40% hog pellet
Really.
mixed with the grains he could get,
Mm.
and that was what he fed his breeders.
Mm.
He'd read the pellets, and like on his race mix, it might have a percentage of egg pellets. Corn was always in there, wheat, and then it might have a touch, maybe 2% of rabbit pellets.
Right.
or so, and I've even known him using fish pellets.
Really?
And I mean, he consistently flew 500 miles on the day.
That's crazy.
His birds were always healthy,
Mhm.
and I mean, he just used what he had at hand.
Right.
Uh, and eventually, he went on. Right before he died, he started some one loss and done very well in those.
Really. When it comes to, so obviously we talked about the feed and what you do for that. When you are like, how do I say this? When you're flying young birds and in young bird season, obviously you're training them. So if your birds, if you know if the bird flies through your young bird season, does that automatically? You obviously probably like you said before, you if it makes it home, you're sending it out. Is there any criteria you need to have with that bird to be able to race it as an old bird, or is there? How do you go about that?
With some of the, especially like the Trentons, they're slow maturing. I usually do not cull a flyer unless I have too many
Hmm.
until they're at least 3 years old.
Okay, 3 years.
Um, it's been my experience that a lot of young bird flyers that flew good as young birds don't fly good as old birds.
Right,
Now, a lot of birds that just you thought were the worst birds in the world end up turning out to be really good old birds.
right, because they just matured, like you
Mm-hmm.
said. Certain families. So with the other family that you have, does that are they longer? They take longer to mature? Or are
No,
they
no, no,
right to the
no. As a
point?
matter of fact, one of our best crosses was the Grooters on the Trentons.
Really?
They'd win at short distance, long distance. It didn't matter.
Okay. Um, when it comes to, we'll go back to young birds. Um, what's your expectation? Like, how do you do the miles as far as when you're training tosses? Do you have the exact same miles that you try to do every year, or do you kind of change it up? And do you have certain miles that they have to hit before the season starts, as far as the race season goes?
Uh, Usually, I don't go. I might go one time to 75 miles. Other than that, I train at least 2 times through the week. They're going to do at least 40 and 50. And then, of course, the days I don't train, they're going to law fly. And then, at minimum, they'll go 20 and just try to keep them informed. Is
Right.
all I'm trying to do without burning them up.
But the most you'll usually go with 75 for a young bird before
Mm-hmm.
obviously
And
race
that's
season.
usually once. I usually hold
Once.
it. When I train, I have trained south toward Memphis,
Hmm.
and 75 is right on the other side of Memphis. And I usually stay at West Memphis,
Hmm.
which is 60 miles. And I'll do that. And then, like I said, once we start flying, I might take them 30 to, 30 in the middle of the week, 50.
Hmm.
And I try to work them at least 20 to 50 twice a week. It depends on time and weather.
Right, right,
But
right,
and of course, they get loft flown every day.
right. So with the 20 and the 50, so let's say our races are on a Sunday. When would you do their next? Obviously, they're going to loft fly most likely
Wednesday.
Monday. Wednesday would be your next toss, and then what would be your
That'll
next
be my
toss?
longest toss
Your
if I
longest
do it.
Wednesday.
If I do it. And
Okay.
sometimes with time, time constraints and work,
Uh-huh.
they might get maybe 120-mile toss on Wednesday, and the rest of the time it's loft fly.
Right. But at least every day you're going to
And
loft
it
fly.
depends. I mean, if they're routing good
Hmm.
and you're getting an hour and a half fly time out of them around the loft,
Hmm.
there's really no sense in going 50 on Wednesday.
Right.
It
Because
depends on how they're acting. You can kind of tell when you kind of need it to try to keep them in the air, keep them in shape.
right. Um, do you have certain expectations on how long you want them to start ranging, or is it kind of just you're going to take them out if they're not ranging long enough for you? Do you have kind of like a what's your ideal time that you'd like them to range
In other
per
words,
day?
I mean, some years I've had teams that when they go to route and they disappear for 2 hours,
Uh-huh.
and of course I'm in the wide open, and I'm kind of
See
I
sometimes.
I can tell if they're in the field or just take a little drive. Um, they'll disappear. Then every now and then you'll see them come over, you
Hmm.
know, and they'll be real high. And
Right.
then other times they don't necessarily seem to do that good other years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I'll start them very young, like a half mile, and just make them get away from the loft and not just fly around the trees there,
Right.
around the loft. But, anyway, I try to get them, and then I work them out from there. And I try to go with a young bird about 10 miles in every direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll get on my flight line and I'll zigzag my flight line. Just kind of jump back and forth across the flight line.
Keep them thinking, right?
Yeah.
So when you do your tosses, right, you go, sometimes it's the same amount of miles. Do you always go in a different direction, or do you go to the same location? Or have you done that and seen different results with that?
When I've used the same release point, I've seen good and bad results from both points.
Okay.
Had one day they fly a decent time and beat you home, and then from the same point later in the week, it seems like they're an hour behind.
Right.
So I think it does them good when you get them thinking and not use the same release point.
Right. Yeah, you would think if they know that release point, if they've been there a few times, they're going to be like, hey, well, we know how to go home.
Yep.
We can kind of just do what we want to do. So that was with young birds, most likely. Or do you have the same problems with old birds, or no? Or
No,
how do you approach old birds getting ready for the season?
This year I kind of let them get a little fat, and so I had to. They wasn't really wanting to route. They wasn't really wanting to fly, and I had to take them and start them at about a half mile just to get them away from home and make them kind of burn up some energy and restricted their diet a little bit, and put them on a diet. And now that was a month ago. Now they're doing great. So
in shape and working
yeah,
out.
if I took them as heavy as they were, if I took them off, they probably would have.
Took a while to get
Took
home.
a while, yeah. They probably had to starve to death for about a week and then eventually try to make it home. But
right.
You generally with old birds, I just had a bad hawk problem this year, and I kind of locked them down through the winter, and kind of got busy and didn't. It was my fault, 100%. Right. But
well, yeah, that was what I was going to ask you. Is do you lock down your old birds through the winter, or because our young bird season starts in usually April, right? Or sometimes it's sooner, and then it's done by beginning of June, correct? Most of the time,
right.
So do you keep flying them through the summer with old birds? Because obviously you probably want to breed out of some, but here in Tennessee we can't breed birds usually till the fall with the heat. So do you lock them down, or you just kind of keep flying them? And
this year I did because of the hawk problem, and I wasn't around. Try to
look out,
watch after the loft and everything. So and then got busy, and like I said, it was 100% my fault this year. But no, usually I loft fly
all year round,
every day. That's good weather.
Okay, makes sense. So they're staying in shape. So there's no taking time for them to get in shape whenever it comes to race season. Do you, with the older birds, if they've already been out to 500 miles during young bird season, do you still just keep it at that 75, or do you even do that with older birds because they're already really trained?
I just try to keep them, work them, before the race. Usually about a month and a half, 2 months before the first race, I'll start taking them on the road just a little bit, just mainly to get them in shape.
Okay.
I don't go. Usually, I don't go as far as a 75 with the old bird.
Okay.
I just try to do as many frequent tosses as I can from 30 to 50 miles, more or less.
And obviously, you've been doing it for a long time. Do you notice, with you doing, under 75, do you notice that you're keeping more, you're cutting down the losses as far as that goes with even your young and old birds? Obviously, I don't know if you lose old birds at that point, but with keeping it consistent within that 75-mile thing instead of taking them far, because I know a lot of people still would go over that, even as young birds.
No, I mean the key is exercise. I mean, a young bird that can fly 75, you take it 75 miles for the first time, it ought to be able to do 100. I mean, it made it home from 75, it ought to be able to do 100, and then so forth. And then, of course, when you get rolling in the races, I mean, you don't need to burn them up as far as that, but they still need to stay informed. And you can't let them. I don't let them sit there from Saturday or Sunday race all the way to the next Sunday race and not fly.
Right.
Just loft fly. But in the off season, I don't fly the old birds except for loft fly.
Okay, so you don't even take them out or anything.
I don't take them and hit the road with them until about a month or a month and a half for first race.
Makes sense because they're pretty conditioned already.
Yep, I mainly let them loft fly. But like I said, this year was a little different, and I paid for it.
Right.
I did pay for it. I lost 400 mile. My first bird home from 400, last old bird. I lost it at about a mile this year.
Really?
I didn't make it home from a mile. I think it was because it was too heavy and it was just hawk bait.
Right. That's where it gets frustrating because you're just like, man, I mean, that bird had what it takes, but sometimes our negligence as the fanciers.
Right. That's 100% on me.
You know what I'm saying?
It won't, you live and learn.
Right.
And then you forget and you learn again. I mean, I hate to say it. That's just part of it.
Right. So when it comes to old birds, do you I know you probably have plenty of pairs, but how do you what criteria does it take for a bird for you to put it in the breeding loft? What is the attributes that you have to see in a bird before you put it in the breeding loft? You know what I'm saying?
Well, my expectations are low with the breeding stock I have now. So I mean, birds that consistently produce at least half average birds, and then you kind of work from there. I mean, I look back at some of the bloodlines that went through my hands, and some of the good bred birds back in the day. They made the job so much easier. They were smart and they were bred with it. And now a lot of the breeding is on pedigree and what the great grandfather done down the road, and it's not necessarily on what the actual bird's doing. The actual birds that are doing good, nobody's wanting to get rid of.
Right.
But they are hard to find now.
What do you with so it kind of just depends with bringing in an older bird. There's no like specific years that, hey, my old bird has to fly 3 seasons before I breed it. If you see something in it you like, or
just I generally I've got a yearling pen and I've got an old bird pen, and in my old bird loft, something's got to be better
than what you have in there.
Then if I get too many in my old bird loft, something's got to be better to replace something that's in the old bird loft. So I have some years where nothing goes into the old bird loft. They stay in a certain section for another couple of years there. If they're not what I consider better, then the old birds I currently have, I don't replace them with just because what they're out of or anything. But I do breed some early out of my yearlings and my old birds. And I just do that for, I fly them, and I do that just for breeding sake of having, children and stuff to go back and breed from if something works out.
Right. How long do you normally keep a bird in the breeding loft? I mean, if it's producing, is it obviously a bird that's producing? It's going to be in there until it's, passes or something. But do you ever just take birds out of the breeding loft if the percentages aren't good from that specific bird? Or
well, my number one breeding Gruder cock was he was banded in '84.
Oh,
and he lived till he was 27, 28 years old. And he bred one fertile egg all the way up till he was 24 years old. And then he went blind, and he just had a special place. He had a special cage and a special place there, and he died there. So But it was well, actually, my mentor passed him on to me. It was his number one cock bird. And ended up being my number one cock bird. Probably never get another one like him.
That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've ever
For a long time. He was older than my daughter. That was the thing. People would come and she'd go, "My dad's got a pigeon older than I am."
That's crazy. I've never heard of a bird living like 20 years, but that's awesome. Well, I mean, at least you know that you have healthy birds. I mean, because a bird's, if it's not healthy, it's not living 27
Mm-hmm.
years. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, some of them I've got now. Let's see, they were 98 birds, 99 birds, and they bred birds year before last.
Really?
They still have they bred good fertile eggs year before last.
I was born in '99, so that's pretty good. Yeah. That's wow.
So the critters I do have they were very long lived, and now the hens they didn't fare that near as good.
Really?
About 8 years was tops on a hen.
Really? So pretty much, if it's still alive and it's breeding decent birds, you're gonna keep it in there.
You're not going to breed a champion out of a nursing home,
right?
The only reason I'm really doing it now, or had been doing it, was trying to keep my bloodline alive and trying to resurrect that old bloodline. But it's not really paying off. It's not really working.
Okay. And that's your older stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When it goes to pairing up birds, do you look at look at the eyes and the color? Do you color balance, or it's just all off performance?
Try to do it on strictly performance
and somewhat pedigree, maybe.
And yeah, I mean, and because I believe a good family, where you get your hybrid vigors when you cross two good families, and two good families are hard to find.
Right.
And then, I mean, when you kind of line breed those, and then when you get down to it, when you put those two families together, you got that hybrid vigor. And if you look, I mean, just about in almost all your one loss races, most of them are crosses. The two good families.
Right.
I mean, there's an exception, but I mean, I'm going to say when you get the pedigrees I've seen from one loss race winners, most of them have been cross birds. And that's how we done it for years, and it worked for us. So now I'm still searching for that great family.
Right. So when you bring in let's say you bring in 2 or 3 pairs of birds from somebody, just anybody, do you breed those 3 pairs together, keep them together, or would
it depends? I mean, it depends. Like I said, a pedigree is a useful tool.
Right.
It doesn't mean everything. Most time it means nothing. But it's still, if it's 100% accurate, it's a useful breeding tool.
Right.
And I've run across this over the years. Certain strains do not pair good together.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, a lot of strains out there now are, I mean, just like Jansen's. I mean, back in the day, I mean, a lot of birds were coming from the Jansen brothers, but they've been dead for a while. And there's been very few people that's held true to the Jansen pigeon. I mean, really and truthfully, the Jansen strain is almost dead as the Gruder strain.
Right.
It just, certain people call it Jansen and stuff like that. There's few people that breed them, still breed good. But I'd say probably 90% of the Jansen you get is not really Jansen anymore.
Right.
We've always we've tried different things, but if you get away, every time you get away from your family, it's a wild card. When you're breeding what you know, the birds are at least going to be average or better.
Right.
And then when you bring in new blood, you want to bring in the best you can get, because that's going to be something new coming in. And I mean, every now and then you do need the new blood, but you need to make sure you're really picky on what you bring in.
Right.
Because that's your wild card there. And I mean, I've had good luck, just like my yearlings. A lot of times, I've had years where I just let them pair up at will and raise some of my better birds.
Right. Because you're not even.
For one, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, when you breed open loft, all my breeders, I breed individual cages, so I know exactly this bird come out of these two birds.
Mm-hmm.
With an open loft, you don't really know for sure.
Right.
And on my pedigrees, when I do my own, I put, if it's bred in open loft, I put an O in parentheses.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, performance is first, pedigree and performance together,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got a certain way I want my birds to look.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I like good muscle and strong back and all that, but that doesn't mean near what the emphasis is put on.
Right.
I do, me and my mentor, we followed eye sign for a long time, studied it real hard. And only thing we found out for sure is every bird we ever had from 100 miles
mm-hmm.
had different eye signs. I mean, it's different, totally different night and day in their eye sign. But all of them did have the little squiggly bottle cap on the inside of the eye sign. You look like an old-fashioned bottle cap.
Mm-hmm.
And every bird we ever had make it 500 miles a day had that.
It's a good little little secret he just gave us right there.
I mean, that was our experience.
Mm-hmm.
As far as everything else, the forward, the full eye, color, nothing.
Didn't matter.
It didn't matter. But everything that it did make it 500 miles a day had the bottle cap eye, what we called it.
Mm-hmm.
And then another older gentleman I had years ago, I had the fortune of meeting and talking with. He handed me a bird out of his loft one day, and of course I'm young. I don't want to look bad. I'm pulling the wing out and I'm feeling the bird up
mm-hmm.
and checking its back, and I look at its eye. And he goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Checking the bird out." He said, "You don't need to do none of that." He said, "I fly by tail sign." He said, "That tail going through that trap, nothing else."
I was about to say.
Yeah, I mean, so but I do have a certain way. I like my birds to look, and you got short cast birds, you got long cast birds, you got short legged birds, you got long legged birds, and I like that medium build.
Mm-hmm.
I do like a single pin tail. That's just a preference.
Right.
I've had some of the Trentons have had like half pintail tails, what it looked like.
Yeah.
I mean, they were nowhere close to a pintail.
Right.
And, they do 500 miles a day and stuff like that. So, and I know there's exceptions to every rule, but in my experience, what really matters is just coming through the trap. Let the basket decide and coming through the trap.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you on that.
I had a good friend who had somebody come and professionally cull his breeders.
Really?
Just by back, eye, form, muscle, everything. Told him, get rid of this bird, get rid of this bird. And he was questioning it, but he done it.
Mm-hmm.
And he never won another race.
I was about to say, how was his winnings after that?
Yeah, it wasn't good. And I mean, I'm not going to mention any names. It was a really well-off person in the pigeon world that come done that for him.
Really? And
he actually paid him to come do it. And he ended up having to buy new breeders and start all over.
That's tough.
He actually told him which birds to pair with what and everything.
Really? I think at the end of the day, too, is if you're flying your birds, you're going to know your birds better than anyone else. I mean, someone can come to your loft and look at your birds and be like, hey, I don't think that bird's very good. And that could be your best bird. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, you're going to know your birds the best as far as, how they're flying and everything like that. So that's crazy.
Another trait I like is personality. I like and all birds won't do it. I don't care how well they're handled from young or whatever, but you've got some that just have that personality and they're they'll slap you, and some that just won't.
Right.
They're still shy away from you and rather be away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like the birds that stay on the top perch.
Really?
I've always had, it's always told me a little something about the bird. But my mentor, he always kept up with, he liked black feet with extra long, thick down.
Hmm.
When they were born, he kept up. I got all of his records, and he kept up with every chick he hatched. And he said he kind of said that coincided with winning too, and the birds that could go the distance. I mean, he liked them when they almost looked like a baby chicken in your hand. Just
really,
the down was just so thick, and that's always just been a deal I watch out for too. Okay. Not to the degree he did. I mean, he was really sharp on that. He took a lot of notes and
really
had a lot of free time and
retired, huh?
Divorced and retired.
He had all the time in the world.
But the birds were his number one. I mean, he'd make a trip to Florida every year. That's over 1,000 miles, and he'd take birds.
Really?
And he always ended up with one or two back from that 1,000 miles. So, I mean,
that's awesome.
Then several clubs formed up over there, smaller clubs, and he done very well in those clubs. And I was over in the hills of Arkansas, and a lot of people. There were several people that retired there from California that flew out there and had really good birds, and they come in. He still was, competitive against them and everything else. And they talked him into one loft racing, and he done
pretty good,
done really well there too.
With when you go to buy birds, how do you? I know there's pedigree, like we've said, there's pedigree, but how do you go? Like, you just there's pictures of them. How do you, if you can't handle them, how do you know what you're getting? I mean, how do you go about that? Because I know you buy birds, so
you don't, but it has to please my eye.
Okay,
it's just it just has to please me, the way I look at it there. Because it's just like a used car. Most people talk them up. Oh, it's an excellent feeling bird. And I've been disappointed, but several of them. I mean, I bought birds from CBS years ago in '99, and he told me, he said, "Well, I can send you these birds." He said, "But I'd do you better if you come out here." So I drove to Oklahoma City and got to feel the birds and pick out my own birds. But most of the time, buying birds is not really
the best way to go.
The best way to go, because I mean, I've been thousands of dollars in on breeding birds that's never done anything.
Really?
They didn't make the first 100-mile race. Didn't breed anything to make the first 100-mile race. My saying on that: the best bird you'll ever own be gave to you.
Really? That's actually, I found that to be true, even in the rollers as well. Honestly, I know you told me that years ago, and I've actually found that to be true.
Yeah, I mean, most people who sell birds, I mean, you come to my loft, and yes, I mean, there's probably a dollar amount if you kept going up that I would sell you my best bird, but chances are, I mean, I'm not going to sell you my best bird.
Right.
I might give you babies off of it, but when they, most of these guys, when they sell birds, they're not going to sell the very best bird. And if they do, they put a price tag on it that nobody wants to pay.
Right.
And it's kind of what's happened with the Chinese and the champions over in Belgium and Europe. They really outprice these birds. A lot of, so a lot of them don't come to the States anymore.
Right. So have you ever bought birds from out of the country or no?
No.
You've never imported anything?
No.
So with, like, let's say you bought a pair, right? Let's say you bought a pair offline or wherever the website is. How long do you keep them before you would cull them? As far as if you keep not getting nothing out of
Depends
them.
on how much I paid for them.
That kind of depends as well.
Yeah. I try to put them with a couple different pairings, before I make up my mind. That's the reason I always end up with too many breeders.
Okay.
Uh, I try to give them a fair chance. I don't just breed from one time and say, "Oh, they make no good."
Mm-hmm.
I try to pair them up with different hens and different families and stuff. See what happens.
Try to give them the best chance to do something. When it comes to like the local club races and stuff like that, what do you like best about that and learning about your birds?
I just think the main thing is the camaraderie of on a weekly basis between the other fanciers. I mean,
Right.
and competing. Of course, being there for your birds. I mean, I don't care whether I take them 10 miles.
Mm-hmm.
The minute they come over, I still feel this feeling like they just flew 1,000 miles.
Right.
That bird, let go 10 miles and it chose to come back here. When I lose that, I'll quit doing it.
Right.
So, I mean, the fact of when you get up there to 100, 200 miles and your birds are in there with everybody else's, and they come home and you're close to winning, stuff like that, that just, it makes it fun.
Right.
And having other people to talk about the same thing you like, about pigeons and
right, common interest.
Most guys in the club are, they'll share their experiences and try to give you a hand if you need it, if you're stumped on something. So you made a lot of good friends through there.
Right. What do you think of like on the? I've noticed a lot of people are doing like one-off races. What is your opinion on those? Do you think those are? How competitive do you think they are? Because I've thought before that, I mean, when you have 100 birds, 150 birds, 1,000 birds flying to the same location, it's just luck that your bird goes in first. I mean, what do you think about that? That's just my opinion.
Yeah, you're gonna open up a can of worms here. Now I do fly them.
Okay.
I try to fly. I mean, I've really enjoyed the last couple of years with the Apple Cup.
Okay.
It's a very well managed race with the losses are minimal compared to most others.
Mm-hmm.
And I like watching Rick walk through the loft there, and he's got 2,000 pigeons, and they're calmer than my 30 bird team sometimes. So, I mean, I can tell there's a lot of time spent with them.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, it's more about the money than it is to me exactly how good the bird is. Trying to say this as nicely as I can.
No, you're good.
I mean, I'd be hypocritical if I told you I didn't like them but I like going to the casino too.
Right.
And I think your odds are just about as good going to the casino. There's been some really good families out there that have been in the top of a many one-off races consistently. But to me, it's one big training toss. I think it's good for the fancier, but I don't necessarily think it is good for the benefit of the breed.
Right, the breed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think it's good. It's more of a fancier's game than it is benefiting the breed because I've thought about it. I know in training myself, my birds coming back to my loft and flying really good. And then once you get them mixed up with 300 more pigeons in a race, you start the cream will rise to the top. More, you start getting them one or two. You might get a few on the drop on a shorter races or whatever. But I think as far as one loft, all you really need is the stamina and the body build to keep up with the course. And on most of them, follow the best bird.
Right.
the fastest bird.
Because the fastest bird could be in the lead, right? And your bird can.
Yeah, I mean, I just got a weird way of thinking on that, but I still believe that. You know, it's just like the equal first. Um, you know, if you go back, you got, say, 20 birds on the drop,
Mm-hmm.
and go back through the trainings and the other races and see if there's a common bird in those drops. I don't care if he clocked 20th.
Right.
To me, that bird would be more valuable than the one that won the big money.
Right, because that could have been his first day getting in there.
He could have just been his lucky day to keep up with that one. But I noticed on training, especially if you get out there and you start splitting the birds up a little bit, if you start having 5 on the drop and this and that, there's usually one common bird in there.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily. I mean, the other 4 will be totally different every time. And I just believe that there's a lot of followers.
Right.
And I think with the one loft, I mean, there's no doubt some of these courses, you got to have a good bird.
Right.
I mean, especially I've flown out there to the west, the Blue Bucket and the Apple Cup, and they're both tough courses.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of mountains
and the weather too.
Yeah, and the weather and the wildfires, and I've been fortunate enough to get birds back from both of them. And like I said, not taking anything away from the birds and their flying ability, just necessarily their home. You know, you need the stamina to keep up.
Right. And if there's, like you said, that many birds, I mean, that was kind of my opinion on it, which I've never sent any birds to a one-off race, but that was just kind of my thinking. And I've talked to a few people, and obviously for the handler, I mean, it's good if you win the money, but your bird could have been last every other time. But.
Well, it very well could be the future of the sport for the simple fact that the smaller clubs are disappearing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the clubs are alienating, young people getting involved. They're not trying to promote for young people. And, I've been through it in my years of flying and having clubs. 1 minute you've got 30 members, and then a few die off, and then a couple years later a few more die off, and then you're down to a dwindling number 4 or 5 members again. And then if it don't disband, then maybe a couple years it jumps up, and you have a lot of people getting interested, and they don't get the support they need from the club and the other members, and they just, they're looking for a hobby. They want a fun hobby. They don't want the politics of a club.
Right.
You got to make it fun in the club to keep people interested.
Exactly.
And that's basically with a one loft, it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, it's probably going to end up being the future of the sport in the United States, especially at the price of gas and things going on to, bring up the price of the race entry fees and stuff like that. Because the average person looking for a hobby is not going to pay it.
It can get expensive. It's definitely, like you said, the pricing of stuff is especially gas is really hurting the sport. But no, I agree. I mean, I definitely think it may be the future of it, and probably will, because I think you can breed birds on a very small scale and send a good amount of birds out to 5-6 different one-off races, and not even really have to fly birds at your house. Just keep your breeders.
A lot of people that fly one-off races don't even own birds.
Right, and that's crazy.
They just pay the money. It's about the money. They call somebody up. Hey, can you breed me a kit? Send it to the Hoosier, or breed me a kit. Send it to the Texas Dash for cash. And they buy the birds, and they pay the entry fees. And of course, the breeder gets the recognition. But a lot of people who fly them don't even have birds. Don't even own a loft.
Right. It's unfortunate. I guess they're still involved though, right? So that's a plus.
Yeah. I mean, they are involved, and but then it goes. I mean, just like I said, I can't go on about the Apple Cup. Rick Me doing the no perch fee. That's huge. I mean, that's keeping. Yeah, that's huge. I mean, it's in his hands. If he doesn't treat the birds right, he's not going to get his perch fee at the activation rate.
Right.
So I mean, it's in his hand. And
No,
and
yeah.
these others, I mean, I've paid the entry fees and perch fees, and be out a couple $1,000s here and there, and never even have a bird make it past the activation race.
Right. No, that's definitely one thing about the Apple Cup, because I've done some research on it as well, and watched a few of their lives, and they're very, I'd say, I mean, like I said, I don't even have birds there, but I think they do really good, and making sure that the birds are healthy, and quarantining them, and all that stuff, and I definitely think they do pretty good. And with the perch fee deal, that's, I mean, cool, because if your bird don't make it, then at least you shouldn't send from that family next time or something.
Yeah, but not only that, I mean, I try to still send my best. I don't want him to
waste his time
to pay the price for it, but
mm-hmm.
That keeps him honest, just like it keeps us. You pay $200 for a perch fee on a bird, and it don't make it 3 months. That bird didn't eat $200 worth of perch fee in 2 months.
Right. Exactly. No, I agree.
So
100%.
I mean, you're still money to be made on the perch fees.
Right.
And
I agree.
So I mean, and he takes all his out at the end instead of more or less. He's if he goes at the end and there's not a bird left to go through the activation, and he gonna have to eat all that feed through and supplies and the E-bands and all that. I mean,
no, yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the best ones, and there's a lot of good ones out there. But you definitely have to have the funds to be in them,
right?
Which is totally fine. I mean, if that's what they want to do, then you're putting on the race, you're more than welcome to charge whatever you want to. It just takes some people out of it.
Yeah, the only downside, the main downside, is the losses.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a black eye on our sport with these animal rights groups out there. I think when you start out with 4,000 pigeons, and you end up with 1,000 at the end and lost 3,000 pigeons, and some of these at 2,000 pigeons ending up with 200 at the end. I think it's just it's something that's going to cause us problems in the long run with some of these animal rights groups. I mean, right now they're trying to get it where we have to be USDA inspected. They want the USDA to oversee our racing and stuff.
That's crazy.
And their philosophy is, if they can't outlaw it, they want to try to get you so many regulations on it you can't afford to do it anymore. Same way with beef or chicken or anything. You read their mission statement on their webpage, and it just crawls all over you. I mean,
right.
What they don't realize is most of the birds are taken care of better than any bird.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And thing is, most of these birds that don't make it, they don't die.
No, they're smart. They
settle in somewhere else. I mean, but I had a 500-mile bird flew a 500-mile race, and I do not understand it for the life of me. He made it within 8 miles of home, maybe. He could see the house, out in the farmland there from where he was. I was driving to town, and he was walking down the side of the road, picking, and I was like, "That's my bird." It still had the rubber counter mark on it and everything. And I pulled over. I walked up there, and it let me get real close, and I could actually read his band number. And then it took off flying, flew, started doing circles. I thought, well, maybe it's going home. This was like a couple days after the race. Well, then the next time I come through there, he was still on the side of the road, and he was kind of ruffled up because he's going downhill quick. And then within a week, I got out. I tried to catch him, and he flew out in the middle of a cotton field, and I couldn't find him. And he might fly 2 foot off the ground. I took a net and I tried to catch him, still couldn't catch him. And then I guess probably, like I said, a week later, I went by there, and a car had run over him.
Really?
Picking around the road there. And that bird made it within a few miles of the house. He was perfectly, He looked like nothing was wrong with him the day I first seen him.
And he was flying
But
around.
he sat
right.
there on the side of that road and starved to death.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and so I mean, for whatever reason, and I mean, he flew 500 miles and was within 8 miles of the house. He got up flying. He could see the loft because we're wide open cotton fields.
Right, right.
And, no hills, trees, or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
All they'd do is get up in there and he could see the loft.
That's insane.
And every year it amazes me. I've had, which I mean, you got to count for hawks, wires, a little bit of everything.
Right.
But every year I have seasoned old birds, that you put money on a 100-mile race and they don't make it 100 miles. But you never know what happens.
Right, and we don't know even the storm they might encounter, because you think about it, 500 miles. I mean, a lot can change, in that little time. But yeah, you definitely don't know what they're encountering, and they might be,
I had a bird years ago. It was like a 300-mile race, and they run into a storm, and it was probably 2 weeks later. Me and my wife were out in the yard, and we're just sitting there messing around in the backyard, and this bird flies over. I looked at her. I said, either that bird had a splint on its leg or a message tied to his leg, but he had something on his band. He went in the loft and went in there, and he did. He had a straw about that long taped onto his band with duct tape, and had both ends of it burnt together. I cut the end off, and it had a little piece of paper rolled up in there, and there's no way I could read it today. And it was a note. It said the lady's name. It said, please don't be mad at your bird. We nursed it back to health and released it on the date, and had the date and had a phone number. Please call us and let us know if it made it home.
That's awesome.
And like I said, they nursed it back and got it healthy and let it go, and it come on home. And I called her, and I ended up driving up there and taking her kids. They researched it online, and I ended up taking her kids some young birds.
Really? How long did it take the bird from the date did it take the bird to get back home?
Oh, the next day.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
was it far away?
Probably. It was actually about 100 miles over fly that it done.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We were flying from the west, and actually from Yorkville, Tennessee is where the lady was.
Oh, wow.
And it still struggled to get home the next day. But
it made it, huh? That's crazy.
And then, we do all this training, and I've even had instances, and especially on some of the Trentons I used to have. I have raised like some late hatches and never flown them. And maybe I bred them for stock or something like that. And then all most they've ever done is come out in the sun cage and look out. Never flown. And on 2 instances, mainly I know of, that I've sold those birds or gave them to somebody. And I tell them, don't let them out.
Right.
They probably ain't gonna know where to go, but they end up getting out on them. Now I don't have any idea how long it took them.
Right.
But one was 140 something miles. It was Little Rock from Blytheville, and bird made it home
just by being out in the cage, not being flown.
Never flew a bit never flew anywhere in its life.
That's crazy.
And I mean, there's no. It might have took it a month to get there.
Right, right.
How long it took to get there. But I've had 2 instances where that's happened.
That's awesome.
And so I mean, I've had a lot of different things go on, and it makes you wonder sometimes if they're good. Why even worry about training?
Exactly.
Besides, keep them in shape.
Well, you have to wonder too, like, if that were to happen with those birds, right, and they just were out in the cage just looking, how do we lose birds that have been well trained? I mean, obviously, birds of prey.
Well, I'll go back to the old strains I used to have. Used to have some really good Lee boars. Had some good, great Grooters, some Paul Sions, had some Heitzman Stasser that my buddy had. They made it easy.
mm-hmm.
They were super smart. They learned to trap fast.
Mm-hmm.
They learned to route fast. Probably whatever road work we put in them, I mean, they didn't need. You could probably jump. I mean, a lot of people. I've heard of a lot of people. They'll go. Their first release point is 50 miles. You know, they'll all fly, then go 50 miles. And my mentor, he always told me anything over 50 is a waste of gas. You know, if you just keep working on 50, 50, 50 and keep them in shape,
Mm-hmm.
anything over 50 is a waste of gas. He never went over 50 miles.
Wow.
And I mean, he let mostly the races do his training. He just kept his birds in shape. And he stayed competitive too. I mean, this wasn't in any big Chicago club or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, his times would have done well in those clubs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he flew consistently in the 15s to 1600s on. He had one bird flew from Dallas, Texas to Smithville, Arkansas in 8.5 hours.
Wow.
That's without a 35 mile per hour tailwind or something like that. I can't remember what he told me, but that was a breeder we had for a long time, and his name was Speedy.
Definitely Speedy.
and like I said, those Grooters, they would come in at night.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't matter if it got dark. I mean, there were several times. You know,
those are day birds, pretty much, huh?
Yeah, I mean, they'd come in at night, and they were easy to train.
That's crazy.
Some of the now you can take an average herd to me, and you can start it at a mile, take it 2 miles, take it 3 miles, you know, and just gradually add up. It cuts your losses, but it don't seem to help when you get to the club level.
Mm-hmm.
In my book, I mean, I've never seen it really help that unless they were. I mean, if you got some that just hadn't really bred anything, I noticed if you try to baby them and work up the distance, they do last for a while,
right?
Until it starts getting to the harder part, and then you end up losing them anyway.
Makes sense. Excuse me.
The most important part is when they're young, their first time. I mean, is you don't want them to get too old. Then you have what's called fly-offs. I mean, they got the muscle. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to come in the loft, and then so they come out and they just go somewhere. And but they're real. It's easy on their first few times out of the loft as a young bird. They don't need any excitement. They need to gradually get to where they come from the landing board to the top of the loft, and it's and gradually get their bearings and within a couple of days there. But if you don't, I mean, I live next to a grain elevator, probably 200 pigeons out there, and every year I'll raise something that I can tell, maybe a grizzle or something like that, and one of them will, first time you let it off, it disappears. But once it gets over them, well, I'm following everybody else. They're followers at first. They feel better, and that's another thing on my training. I kind of mixed it up this year on my young birds. I started them out up to 10 miles. They flew in a group, and then after that, they flew in small groups. And my theory on that was, if you train them in a big group, or you train them in a group all the time, and then you get down to the races and you want them to separate and be confident.
Right. Fly in smaller groups.
Yeah. So if I fly them in smaller groups and couple, sometimes just drive around and throw two, pull over the side of the road, throw two out the window. I tried that. sitting in a spot with young birds and carrying a good book or playing on your phone and sit there and reach in there, grab a bird, throw it up, wait till it gets out of sight,
Mm-hmm.
wait about
Smart.
30 minutes, then grab another bird, throw it up. You sit there and you spend hours out there, and then when your wife tells you, well, they all come home together. So they just flew out, or they flew around till they found somebody else to fly with.
Right. But one of them has to be smart, right? One of them has to be the smart one to get them home.
Well, they didn't have the confidence.
Right. They're young birds, yeah.
When they're real young like that, your first few times they got to build that confidence up.
Makes sense. What would so let's say there's a new flyer. What would be some advice you'd give someone that you wish you would have got it as a young flyer, or just young in the sport in general?
Oh, don't keep too many birds.
Start small.
Do not, search around. Don't. I mean, be grateful for birds offered to you, but ultimately you got to teach to get the best you possibly can. I mean, I don't mean, don't end up with 100 breeders that were gave to you and try to think you're going to figure out how to breed some good birds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that wasn't taught to me. I learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
And even now, my wife calls me a pigeon collector, but I mean, everything I got in there, I know.
Yeah.
Where how it come down the line, and then I'm bad about, well, this bird's getting old, I'm gonna breed another one and just hold on to it in case I need to replace that cock on this line.
Mm-hmm.
And then next thing you know, that bird lives another 5 years. This bird that I bred is already old, and so
So you would say just start small and then move up from there, and make sure you So let's say as a new person, or if you were new into it, how would you go about getting birds? Would you go just look at some, the person that's winning a lot?
I still consider them the poor man's racehorse. Now, of course, in the U.S., we bumped the price up on what we think is the best breeder out there. But one of the best birds I've ever bought, I bought at a flea market.
Really?
Yeah, $5. And the old man said he had a bunch of young birds there. They were banded, and he said that they had been test flown. He had flown them out to 75 miles. And there's one there that just caught my eye.
Had that look,
and I bought her. And she turned out to be, had no idea what she was, had no idea, never could find the man again, never seen him, but that was one of my best birds.
wow.
So the thing, is, I guarantee you, if you look at the one loss or the clubs, money don't buy you success
That's right.
in the Racing Pigeon world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you got the dedication to them and you got the money to buy something really good and you want to do it, I had no problem with it. But I know you can be competitive, and I know there's a lot of guys say, "No, if you ain't buying the best, you ain't winning." I know that's not true.
Right.
I've seen, just like my buddy in the hills over there,
Mm-hmm.
a guy named Jim Warren from California. He come in. He had some high dollar birds, and they were good.
Mm-hmm.
But every week it was just back and forth between them two.
Really?
And I mean, if one of them won first, the other one's going to win second. And I mean, all the way through the season. And I would say that buddy of mine might sell you a bird for $2 just to see if he wasn't big on giving them away because he just gave away so many good birds over the past, and he figured if you were serious, you were willing to pay something for them.
Right.
And if you give them to somebody, a lot of people don't think they're worth anything.
Right.
But me and him, if I acquired, like when I acquired the Trentons, I took half of them to him, and I kept half of them for the first year. The next year, I took my half to him and got them that half back. And we, he was a master at breeding, and more or less, I mean, he kept us going a lot of times because my ideas, I was just learning. My ideas on the breeding wasn't really where he was. So
Right.
he was quite a bit older than me, and he just took me under his wing. And matter of fact, we've even went up to Ohio to pick up more Trentons, and I took him with me to Ohio. Yeah,
that was awesome.
And
that's cool.
I had the good fortune to buy the Oshman Trentons before he passed away.
Oh, and wow.
I'm still flying that family.
That's cool. I mean, that's really what it's all about too. At the end of the day, I mean, it sounds like you guys had more, had a good relationship, and that goes along.
Yeah,
that goes a long ways with people, and that's awesome.
But most people in the club, you do have a good relationship with, and you're going to meet some good friends. You're going to meet, you're going to get a lot of good knowledge out of most people. And like you said, a lot of guys will not give you their secret or give you any advice.
Yeah.
And it's just like I just read on Facebook the other day. There's one club, Combine, up in Illinois, and they just voted that, say your son wants to fly with you, he's got to have a total different physical address.
That's crazy.
And
it's not even possible.
So why would you cut out the junior members and trying to get them going?
Right. Doesn't make any sense.
I mean, just about every time you release birds on a training toss or anything, somebody is inquisitive about it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I've went to drop birds off, want to be in a hurry and think I'm just going to let the birds go, and I'm going to somebody pull up. What are you doing with those?
It looks suspicious.
Yeah, and then you tell them, and then they're, oh, no way. And then before you know it, you're there for 30, 45 minutes, an hour in a conversation trying to explain how everything works. But, you don't want to, you always got in your mind that's maybe a new flyer or maybe somebody that, wants to get started. So you don't want to just be rude and walk off or.
Right. It's definitely a conversation starter for anybody, even at work, people ask me about it and I'll tell them, and they're like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Like, I have to see this. It's almost unbelievable. And I'm like, it's cool. I mean, I was raised into it. So for me, it's just, it's life. But for some people, it's like the craziest thing they've ever heard of. But it's cool.
Well, my brother-in-law, he years ago, my wife was taking some birds off for me, and he wanted to ride, and had a truck with a camper on the back of it, camper shell. Anyway, they get way out middle of nowhere on the gravel road. Go back there and they open it, and he's like, "Sis, there ain't no way those birds are going back home. Ain't no way." He said, "I don't even know where I'm at." He said, "How them birds gonna get home?"
That's funny.
And anyway, so he took can't remember, it was a piece of wire or red tie or something, and he put it on one of those birds' feet right above the van there. And Angie said, "Well, I guarantee you, if you ask him, he can give you that when you get home." And he bet her like $50 that there's no way that he would get that back. And I just happened to see it. And so I'd already took it off, and so I was going to ask her, "What's this doing on the bird's foot?" And so when they pull up, I said, "What's this doing on?" He goes, "Oh my goodness!" And hands her $50. So
that's awesome. That's so funny.
But luckily, that's another thing that helps a lot with this hobby is having a good spouse that supports.
Yeah, for real. What's one thing about the sport that you wish you could change or not even change, just improve, that you see as an issue that you wish you could get awareness about? It's a tough one, huh?
Well, I mean, I wish there was a easier way to get new members started. I wish there was a better process for even providing them with clocks, and it don't have to be a benzene M3.
Mm-hmm.
Just provide a member with something to get started that don't cost him a fortune to get started.
Right.
Then if he wants to be serious, then he'll upgrade to whatever he wants, or whatever afterwards. But
Right.
not just make it a lot cheaper for new members to get started in the races and the birds. And a lot of that has to do, like you said, with clubs and the members putting forth. But I wish there was something more. AU's got the mentor program, and one of our members got involved in that, and it was really great for him. But then when he come to the club, though, the club really had nothing to offer.
Mm-hmm.
He had to come out with the money, and it really caused him a sour note with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time the members told him you have to have an electronic clock, got to be a Taurus,
Mm-hmm.
and of course he had to go buy a new clock
Right.
if he was going to race. But
which AU rules is you can fly.
Yeah, we got it different. I mean now,
right.
If a new member comes in and wants to fly the countermark rubber band clock,
Old school.
we'll oblige.
Right. It's all about getting people involved.
Then, I believe after they see the electronic, if they're going to be serious, they'll want one. But yeah, I mean, getting notices right now.
Right. Exactly. I think that's really cool. I mean, that changed the game, and the technology out there for pigeon racing nowadays is just insane. It's so cool, though. I mean, it makes it easy, and like I've always told him, that if it's convenient and it's easy, you're more likely to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the electronic clocks, it's really a lifesaver. I worked in a steel mill for 20 something years, and I worked 8 to 8 and 12-hour days, 4 on 4 off, which we never got our 4 off. But you only get a month of weekends, and you only get one full weekend every month, every other month, because the way your days fall. And when it come to racing, it's where I tell you where a good spouse is good. I mean, a lot of times she took birds to the counter market for me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times she'd be the one sitting out there in the loft to get the rubber counter mark off and put in the clock.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I would do without sleep. I would stay as long as I could with them, I was on nights or something like that.
Right.
But if they were running late or it got to the longer races, I still never could sleep. I'd wake up, go out there, game birds yet? No, I'll go back to bed. I'll go back to bed, come back. But, she really helped me through them years, or I would have probably had to get rid of the birds them years I worked there.
Right.
Because I wouldn't have had time. I mean, she helped feed. She'd help me do a lot with them. And never, and she enjoyed them.
Right.
She always thought it was interesting because I had them when we got married, before we got married.
Mm-hmm.
She always says, I'll go before the birds do.
You're like, that's right.
So she won't put that ultimatum down.
Yeah. That's good. See, that's a big plus, that she probably kind of grew to love them too, because she probably didn't really have that, for them in the
C.D.
beginning.
Fisher, I've got a list. I'll pass it on to you sometime. It's like the 10 things of pigeon.
Mm-hmm.
And number 10 is never neglect the masseuse. Because, I mean, they're a valuable help to you.
Right,
and that was his deal. Number 1 was never overcrowd.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a whole list. It was something that he wrote, the 10 do's and do nots of pigeon racing.
That's awesome. What are your goals for like 2023? Do you have goals as far as, I know you said you have birds that won off races? Do you have do you set goals every year, or is it kind of just like whatever happens?
Well, it ends up being whatever happens. But yeah, right. I try to set goals.
What are some of your goals for this year?
Yeah, I mean, last year I had a pretty good run at the Cape Coral, and I did win a little money at the Apple Cup. I mean, a very It's 54th place,
Mm-hmm.
but I was still proud of that bird. There was quite a few birds, and I ended up getting 3 birds back from there that went the whole course.
That's good.
So, I mean, it started, I think, with 2,700 birds and ended up at the final race. I think, I want to say there was 1492 went to the final race.
Pretty good, too.
And 90, I think he said 90, over 90% of the flyers that entered had a bird went to the final race.
And you had 3, right?
Yeah, I had
That's
3
really
went
good.
to the final race. And I had one that won a little money, so wasn't enough to retire off of. But I won a little money in the Cape Coral, which is not near as big a race, but it is about 500 birds in the
Mm-hmm.
futurity down there. It's a handler race where you got so many people that's handling so many birds.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
And they race their combine or whatever, then they'll have a special race for these birds, all out of area birds.
That's really cool.
And
did you do pretty good in that one too, or no?
Yeah, I done really good in that one too.
That's good.
As a matter of fact, the birds are still there. And last I checked, there's 3 of them down there, and I've got only sent 4, and all 4 of mine made it to the first race. You can send 3 birds and a backup bird,
Mm-hmm.
and my backup bird made it to the race too, so I got to enter him in the race too, and then and the birds that I did lose was bred by somebody else, so I'm pretty happy with that too.
Yeah,
but
is that Florida? Is that in
Cape
Florida?
Coral, yeah.
Cape Coral, Florida. Okay.
And we decided that he could go ahead and keep them, and he's going to run them through this old bird season and the combine down there, and just have a little money. Since they're going to have to be breeders anyway, or
right.
Have a little bit more under their belt when they come home. But 2 of them are nest mates.
Oh wow!
And that's another thing I was going to tell you. You know, you plan and you think about the breeding in your head.
Mm.
Well, my handler called me like the 3rd week of February and said, "Hey man, I'd like to have all the birds here by February, end of February."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, "Man, I just got a very few that on pairs here.
Mm-hmm.
It's paired up, and it's nothing that I had intentions of sending anywhere like that."
Right.
So I sent both those nest mates
just to fill the numbers, yeah.
Just to get my numbers, and then I had another bird, and I sent it, and then I borrowed a young bird from somebody else and sent it. That's the one I lost, was the young bird from somebody. But I didn't even think about this was a new pairing. Wasn't sure on. I didn't have a lot of confidence in them, and didn't really think it was going to be that good.
Really?
And it's 2 nest mates, and they've flown they flew the whole futurity, and now they're flying the whole young old bird season so far.
So they'll have a lot under their belt.
And coming in, they've been 7th and 8th. They come in together in the final race, the final 350. They were, I want to say, 15th and 16th.
Oh, wow.
They come in back to back. They were my handler's first 2 birds every time. Wherever they showed up on the race sheet, they were still his first 2 birds about every time. Yeah,
that's awesome.
So I was pretty proud of those 2.
Would you ever pair them up together or no?
They're paired together this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I raised a couple late hatches, and when I was looking at my records the other day on the old bird, since I've been training for old birds, those 2 late hatches have been doing good.
Really? So that's a good pairing for you.
Yep.
Wow, that's good. You have anything else you'd like to talk about, or kind of?
No.
We cover a lot of the good bases for stuff you.
I want to say thank you for interviewing me.
Yeah.
Kind of humble there.
Yeah. Yes, sir. You're like I said. You're got a lot of the good knowledge. You don't talk about it too much. So I was happy to ask you to come on.
I've got my own views on it from several years of doing it.
Right.
And like I said, I've played every game in the sport. I've played buying the high-dollar breeders and uh, playing the high-dollar races and all that. And
Yeah.
And then, like I said, if you're doing it for the money, you better look for something else. I'd be just as good going to a casino and putting it on black and red.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. If you're not doing it for the love of the birds, eventually it'll fade for you. But well, guys, that will be it for this episode, episode 3. I appreciate Joe coming on and sharing some of his knowledge with us. I mean, I definitely learned a lot just being here and listening to a lot of stuff he had to say. But yeah, thank you guys for watching.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.